So building psychological safety at work through play. So we recognize that we all want to belong. This is a workshop that I've done numerous times. I recently did this for Siemens not too long ago, so I'm borrowing some of the slides from it. But yeah, and the idea is that, you know, we always want to feel appreciated and connected at our work, especially if we're working there 2,000 to 2,500 hours per year, right? I think we forget how long we're there. So why is it not more fun, right? So what we're covering today is we're defining why play and why is it important. We're going to be exploring what psychological safety is and then exploring what the difference between a nice and a kind workplace looks like. We're going to be exploring equity in action. I'm looking at you, Jaisha, if you want to add on to this, but we're going to be exploring that as well. And then diving into what are the traits of like a healthy, balanced team? Like, how are we actually creating psychological safety by extrapolating specific traits that are currently missing from our team? So I define psychological safety as what we just asked before, right? A place where employees feel seen, heard, appreciated, and valued. Now, the seen and heard part is what we just talked about. But the reason why I say appreciated and valued is the appreciation is like, what's your language of appreciation? How are you actually communicating your that you care for that individual and you're recognizing what they're doing right now, right? Like in the moment, like today, how are you appreciating your staff, right? And then valued is more the idea of what impact have they had on the organization? What impact have they had on the team? What impact have they had on clients? And the more we can actually explore that, and that's what we're going to kind of do as well today, that is, I feel, has to be encompassed when we talk about psychological safety. So so I changed these slides right before today because we have to explore. So I already asked this question, whether you felt seen, heard, appreciated, and valued at work, but we have to explore the Twitter debacle that is currently going on. We just have to explore for just a moment because you are seeing the erosion of psychological safety of an organization that's been around for, I think it's like 15 years now, in the span of weeks. And you're just going to watch it every time you see Twitter, every time you see anything about Twitter, just take a moment to read it just to see what is happening and how the psychological safety is disappearing. So then on top of the fact that he was going to tell a bunch of people that he was going to fire them, right? Because he was letting people know, like, he was actually, what was that? He was actually saying that he was going to fire 75% of the staff to begin with. 2 weeks before he came in, and then he started cutting staff. But a lot of staff, talk about not feeling seen, a lot of staff just got their email cut off and their Slack cut off, and they were never notified. They weren't even told that their job was over. And then other people received like some random email from Elon, and then that was it. And then they never got to say goodbye. So on top of that, then you had the founder of Twitter apologizing to staff for being laid off. And then you had staff that were actually saying goodbye over Twitter because they couldn't say goodbye to people directly. They weren't able to exchange the personal emails or phone numbers and anything like that. And it's very similar to, I think it was better.com. Better.com did the exact same thing after a Zoom thing. So talk about not feeling seen. And then on top of that, this just came out today in the New Yorker. So check this article out. But someone was like, I wish I got laid off. Like, I wish I was one of them because I don't want to be here. Like, I have no desire to be part of this organization. And you have to remember that Twitter was a public square. Like, the whole point of Twitter was to create psychological safety for anyone that shows up in the square so they could share. And yes, there was a lot of hate from time to time, but for the most part, it was discussion in this public square. And now so many people are leaving. And this is the effect that we can actually argue around. Not only does psychological safety destroy the company internally, but it's going to destroy it externally, because you've seen that with better.com. You're seeing it now with this. You saw it with Blockbuster. You saw it with Toys R Us. Like, it happens over and over again. And it begins, the canary in the coal mine is when the psychological safety starts to erode. So if you ever need to argue, like, why is this important? Because your company might go out of business if you don't address this. And then lastly, and this is the really messed up part, I don't know if you heard this today. So they fired too many people. So they're now trying to hire some of those people back because they realized they fired people that were running crucial tasks. And they were like, so Matt, would you go back? Would you go back? Like, write in the chat if you'd go back, or if you wouldn't go back. Like, it's just the audacity, the caucasity of what is happening. So we have to realize this is happening in real time all the time. And this is just one example of that. All right. So now that we've explored that, and then we would have explored, when have you not felt seen, heard, appreciated, and valued? So part of what I'm writing up here as the play experiment, I wrote play experiment 1A and then 1B, is these are the questions that you need to be asking your team leaders to ask their staffs on a regular basis, like, once a quarter or during their performance evaluation. What's going on right now where you have not felt heard, right? Let's explore that. Let's have that hard conversation. And when have you felt heard? Because a lot of people sometimes, as we were talking earlier about languages of appreciation, some people feel heard in a certain way and some people don't feel heard in certain ways. So we have to explore that. We have to explore, how can I make sure this person feels valued at their job? And this is a constant question in a play experiment that you constantly should be getting your team leaders to ask. And if they're not asking this question, then start getting them to. So now let's explore, who in the world am I? My name's Jeff Harry. As you can see, that's pre-pandemic, and now that's post-pandemic. As you can see, it's been hard, Kevin. It's been hard. And when I was a kid, I saw the movie Big with Tom Hanks. So write in the chat if you saw the movie Big with Tom Hanks. I love that movie. And what he got to do in that movie, he got to play with toys for a living. And I was like, you can do that as a job? Like, I can't believe that's a job. So I started writing toy companies in 3rd grade, and I did not stop until I got into the toy industry. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted. Write in the chat if this is ever experienced for you. You've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you got there, like, because this is how it felt, right? Right, Crystal? This is how it felt, like not seen, not heard, not appreciated, not valued, very toxic masculine leaders, just like not a safe environment. And I went through various different toy companies, including Toys R Us, at their corporate office. So I saw it like 9 years before they went out of business, what was already happening, how it was already hemorrhaging. So I left New York, came to the San Francisco Bay Area, and I bumped into an organization on Craigslist teaching kids engineering through Lego. It was a joke of a job. 7 people, but they got to play for a living. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. So I was just like, what do I need to do in order to make this a real thing? And we took it from 7 people to 400 people. It became the largest Lego-inspired STEM organization in the U.S. And we taught in Folsom and Roseville. I've been out to those places in Sacramento. I live in Oakland, California now. But yeah, we taught everywhere, but we did it all by playing. Like, we had no business plan. We picked people we thought were fun. We picked cities we thought were fun. We prioritized people over profit. We were just making it up as we went along. We failed miserably a lot, but because we followed our curiosity and we cared about our staff, it worked. So we were like, why aren't more organizations doing this? And then I started running team building events for all these tech companies mentioned earlier, where I realized, even though they were like the Facebook, Google, Adobe, the best companies in the world, they weren't creating a certain level of psychological safety either. So if they weren't doing it, how bad is it at just a regular company, right? So this is part of the reason why I created this workshop, I think like a year or 2 years ago, right? So let me define what I mean by play when I'm talking about what is play, right? So I define play as any joyful act where you forget about time. where there is no purpose, there is no result. You are fully immersed in the moment. You are fully in flow. And this is where, again, psychological safety needs to be explored here, right? Is also play is the opposite of perfection. Perfection is rooted in ego, shame, constantly trying to be right. Play is rooted in curiosity, experimentation, a sense of wonder and awe. So the question then I would ask of you then is like, how can you remove perfection from your workplace and replace it with experimentation and play? I get it. You have to hit certain numbers. I get it. You have to run a certain amount of workshop, all that stuff. I get that you have to hit certain metrics. And also what Kevin said earlier, does it have to be in a certain way? Where can there be experimentation, play? Where can you create the playground where people can play rather than it has to be just one way? This is Kevin Carroll. He didn't actually quote this, but he's an amazing play mentor of mine. And he would say, you'll find the future wherever people are having the most fun. So a lot of times people will argue, well, why is play's not really important? Like, who cares about play? Like, it's stupid. You know, we'll play when the work gets done, right? When the work is over, then we'll play. And I will challenge you on that, because Twitter used to be the place where the future was, right? Organizations like TikTok, you know, and Hulu at one point and Netflix at one point, you know, where people are having the most fun, that's where you gravitate towards. If you're talking about like right now, like you're hemorrhaging staff, people are leaving, they're leaving for organizations where people are having more fun. That is what is happening right now. So how are you actually cultivating the autonomy, as Kevin said, and the freedom so people can have fun in their own way? Not that we're going to tell them you need to do forced fun this way, but how are they being allowed to do that? And the argument for like, well, where are the numbers that argue for this is Google, right? Google used to do this. I don't know if they do this anymore, but they used to have their 20% rule where they would give their staff 20% of their time to pursue whatever they wanted as long as they helped Google. And 50% of Google's products came from that playground time, from that playtime, from that curiosity time. And what came from that? AdSense, Gmail, Google Maps, Google News, Google Earth. The foundations of Google came from play. So if you need to argue for it, use this example as much as possible. This basically is what is funding Google right now and all their random experiments that are not working, but they allowed their staff to play. And this is why we need to cultivate more psychological safety by allowing people freedom to play in their own way, right? Not forced fun, so that they can create something that comes from like their inner child that is really powerful and impactful. That's where all the innovation actually comes from. So then the question and play experiment number 3 that I would be asking your staff is, what is their play, right? What is your staff's zone of genius or their flow work? And another way of asking that would be, what is the work where your staff does where they forget about time, right? Where time slows down. What is the work where if they weren't getting paid to do this, they would still do this? Great question to ask. Many of them would be like, no, I will be paid no matter what. I get it. Totally understandable. But having said that, you know, what is that work that they would love to do? Because studies find when they get to do their flow work, they are 500% more productive, 5 times more productive in all of the work they do, not just their flow work, when you allow them to do that. So yes, I understand. You can't give your staff 20% of their time to do whatever they want. You're not Google. You don't have that funds, right? But you can give them 5%. You can give them an extra hour or 2 hours to pursue something that just fascinates them, as long as it benefits the organization. See what happens when you do that. That is another way in which staff all of a sudden now feel seen again, right? Because you're giving them that autonomy and that value and freedom to pursue something that truly is meaningful to them. And welcome back, Nunu. All right, so now this is a perfect time for everyone to come back, because I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then I'm going to have you actually reflect on this. So if you don't have a piece of paper out, pull out a piece of paper, because I want you to actually reflect on this. Crystal's already way ahead of the game. I love it. But what we want, and this again is an exercise I'd recommend you do with your team leaders and their staff, but I'm going to ask you 2 questions to actually explore your why, right? And again, this is about the first part of feeling seen. So the first question that I want you to explore, and this is just for the last year, but I want you to explore, how many people's lives have you impacted in a positive way this year at your job, directly and indirectly? So being that we're in November, I want you to think about, how many trainings have you run? How many people have you mentored? How many people have you talked off the ledge of basically wanting to quit? How many people have you mentored during this time? I want you to just explore that. How many people's lives have you impacted in a positive way this year? And I say directly and indirectly, because say, for example, you saved someone's job this year, right? By talking them off the ledge, or mentoring them so they got promoted. How does that also impact their family? And I want you to think about that. And as you think about that, try to come up with a number, just so that you understand the level of impact, the vast amount of impact that you've actually had, right? And then after you've done that, then I will want you to explore this. And this part, I will give you some time to actually reflect on this, and write this actually down for yourself. And this is a great exercise to do with others. But this is the question I'm going to ask you. I want you to think of your most memorable and meaningful moment where you impacted someone in a positive way. And I'm not just talking about in this past year. Since you got into talent development, talent acquisition, what is one of your most memorable and meaningful moments where you impacted someone in a positive way? And I'll give you a couple minutes to reflect on that, and then write that story down, as we are going to be sharing that in groups. And I will stop. All right, we're coming back. All right, we're back, everyone. Welcome back. Okay. Before we move on to the feeling heard part of the discussion, what were some of the things that you actually heard from people, or you shared yourself, that you found extremely compelling, that you felt you'd like to share here to remind us of why you do the work that you do? Crystal.
I just want to say, what I heard in our breakout room was, we almost make the biggest impact when we're not trying, when it's just us being ourselves, doing things that we normally do, or having conversations that we normally do, where we are. I think of it as kind of that authentic or genuine, this is me, and we're allowed to do that. Others react to that in a way that says, thank you, that was meaningful for me. And so it's so interesting how we try so hard to, I mean, maybe we don't, but where we feel like we have to try so hard to make an impact for people. And that's not what it's about. It's just like the play, right? It's what do you do when you're at your best is, I'm not even thinking about it, I'm just doing it. That's where we make the impact. That's what I got.
And you are who you are, right? So you because you're not trying, you're giving me permission to then be like, oh, I can be who I am. I don't have to try either, right? So everyone's giving permission to everybody else. Any others? That was awesome.
I think that what I found is that it's really when you were playing like that coaching role, where you were allowing someone to like do their thing, like do whatever it is, be creative, be a free thinker. And that makes me proud, because you're succeeding with like the tools and resources and like the nuggets I'm giving you, but you're doing it, like, good job,
That actually then brings up a really great question that I'm going to now add to my slides, Angela, because it's genius on your part, is asking team leaders, what level of autonomy are they giving their staff, right? Mm-hmm. How much freedom are you actually giving your staff to figure out the problem their way? And then how much are you focused on perfection to actually drive your work? Any others? Oh man, I could riff on this all day. Nylene, Nunu, Wendy, Jaisha, Jen, Kevin, any of you feel inspired?
Well, I would just say, back to Crystal's comments early on about don't ask for input you don't intend to use. I train facilitators, and I basically say, do not ever do that. Do not. you will lose trust, and then you are worthless. So if you've got something, the decision is made, say decision has been made. Now let's think about how we could implement it. But that's really, really critical to be yourself and to be honest. That manipulation will cost you dearly, so one should never do it.
I completely agree with that, because it's this idea of showing up messy as opposed to trying to be all perfect, right? And I feel as if, and obviously I'm talking to, preaching to the choir, but I think your roles are probably some of the most important in this whole organization, because you are doing a really difficult role of facilitating really hard teams that may not be getting along, right? Like trying to figure out how to navigate all of that and do that without them telling you what the problem is sometimes, because they don't even know what the problem is, right? You have to figure it out. So it's like the superpower that you have, and the fact that, like, part of the reason why we did the whole thing of how many people have you impacted as well is I want you, and this is the same thing you can do with staff and team leaders, I want you to recognize the level of impact you've had over the entire organization, right? Someone I was talking with that was a speaker was like, that can't be right. She's like, I've spoken to 15,000 people this year. And I was like, yeah, maybe you did. Like, maybe it's that maybe it's in the thousands, and you just haven't given yourself credit for all of that. Okay, any others to share before we move on?
Jen has her hand up.
I'll go. I was in the same group as Crystal and Kevin, and the stories we shared, I thought one of the interesting connections was that we kind of got feedback back from the people, and it was very specific about what we did, and that just made me think that's a great skill to reply back to the leaders, because all of them, again, like I said, were things that we wouldn't even have thought twice about, and then someone telling us that impact. And then kind of like what you're saying, that identifying the impact you've done, like really helping people see that.
Yes.
You did a good job. It's like, this is why this was impactful. And like, whenever I get an email compliment and I'm trying to get my team to do the same thing, like I save it, because some days you need to go back and look at that and go, okay, I'm not trash. Like, I've done these things.
You need your success folder, your joy folder. I hope you all have a joy folder somewhere.
Yeah. But I think that as a way leaders can help too. And I want to do better at that too, is telling people, hey, this is exactly how you have positively impacted my life. And you thought it was just a Wednesday.
You also bring up a really good point that, again, many of you do really well, because you're facilitators, is you actually know what active listening looks like, right? Like, I actually run a workshop called Navigating Difficult Conversations, where I ask people to listen for what's not being said. And that's what facilitators are doing all of the time, right? And the more we can actually help our team leaders to do that as well, and not assume, like trust and verify, but actually looking for those moments of what is not being said. That's the part where it's just like, maybe I won't tell them that I don't feel seen, heard, or appreciated or valued when I get asked. But what else am I communicating that actually communicates that? All right, we got to move on as we're getting to the next section. Oh, wait, and there was one last, Chris, helping people see the impact and growth they are making. Give specific feedback so people know that their contributions are meaningful. Exactly. Specific and clear, rather than like, you're doing a great job, even though I haven't really paid attention to what you're doing. Okay. So we've explored the idea of like zone of genius, understanding your why. That's very much about feeling seen, right? We're talking about feeling seen. But now let's get into the aspect of feeling heard. Oh, wait, actually, let me finish this last part regarding your why, right? So two things. When I used to do campaign work, we would do this all the time, where we would have people share their why and then try to align it with the values of the campaign. And by doing that, what actually happened during that time, and this is what actually was happening when you were sharing in your groups, is you actually get a shot of dopamine every time you share a story, right? And that whole idea of then you're reflecting back, oh, that was so amazing. You're actually celebrating those wins. So people get that shot of dopamine, that reward chemical. Also, when you are sharing the story, people are giving you compliments. So you're getting that love hormone, the oxytocin, that you also get when you're hanging out with a kid or a pet or holding hands or hugging. You know, that same thing is getting conjured up. Right. And then earlier we had you reflect and write. And the reason why I did that is because that's an opportunity for a more meditative exercise. So I recommend doing this more and more in your workshops when you're training. When is it quiet? When are you doing this thing to actually calm people down? Because they can't play when they're in an anxiety-ridden state, but when their mood is stabilized, then they can actually reflect and enjoy the process more. And then finally, the whole idea of endorphins, if you are sharing stories that are funny, right, then you're literally taking pain away from people. And they say this a lot, the most psychologically safe workspaces, you will see the most amount of laughter, right? Meetings get better when people are laughing. Not, again, not forced, right? But the same feeling you get when you're eating dark chocolate, you get from laughing when you're sharing really impactful stories. So how are we constantly trying to conjure up this dose in order to get people to feel seen, right? Now let's get into feeling heard. So the idea of feeling heard, and Jaisha kind of mentioned this earlier when I was in her group, about this idea of what does actual belonging and equity look like, right? Because we can't talk about psychological safety without talking about belonging and equity. So what happens in a workplace that lacks belonging? So there was a software developer that worked for WebEx. He trained a lot of people actually at one point, and then he, you know, I think it was like one of the VPs at one point, and he was just like, I have this really great idea in order to improve WebEx, and it would really change the whole organization, but we would have to rebuild, you know, a lot of our virtual trainings from the ground up, like even how we do our Zoom meetings, or not our Zoom meetings, I mean our virtual meetings. And WebEx was like, that seems like a lot of work. We don't want to do it. And he's like, are you sure? And he's like, nah. So it's just like, okay, well, I'm just going to build it for myself because I think it's really cool and really fun. And I'll just create my own organization. And that organization became Zoom, as many of you may know. So this is part of the idea of like, well, why is psychological safety important, you know, and belonging? Because you are losing ideas. Belonging and equity is where you're cultivating the greatest ideas and fostering the best talent, right? And what are we doing to actually make sure our talent feels heard so that they can actually express the great innovative ideas that they have, you know, in their head? So many of you already know, I'm not going to go into great detail around the idea of defining equity in too much detail, but I will just cover it really quickly. I believe equity is the action that creates real belonging. You have to do actual tangible equity actions so that people believe that this is a safe space. You can't just talk about it, as Jaisha mentioned earlier, with like performative actions. So what are you actually doing? What does equity in action look like? Right. And we've seen this before, equality versus equity, but I think I like this better, the equality versus equity in the workplace, because when I talk about this from the standpoint of like, you know, equity is about adapting to people's various levels of support of what they specifically need and not what everyone needs. And we're just going to get everyone across the board. The benefit of the equity is that everyone benefits. When buildings became ADA compliant and you had to have an elevator, now people didn't have to walk up 40 floors, even if they weren't able to walk before, right? Or if they were able to walk, everyone benefits when we create an equitable workplace. But I think a lot of times we don't recognize that, or we don't argue for that. We think it's like, oh, why do we have to adapt to this one person? Because that would actually create a certain sense of belonging, in a sense where everyone feels heard, because you're
okay.
Oh, go ahead.
What do you need to do?
Oh, so, okay. Someone's just talking. Yeah, where people actually feel heard, because when that person that is least, The person that is suffering the most, if that person is their issues are actually getting addressed, that ensures that everyone else's issues are getting addressed, right? So how are we making sure that the person that is most vulnerable is being looked out for? And that's what we have to then explore. So then I challenge you to do this. We need to stop having nice meetings. We need to end the nice meetings. They're horrible. And what do I mean by nice meetings? Nothing important can emerge. This is where people are being way too polite. This is where they're being very passive. This is where they're afraid to speak up. And this is where like no one wants to rock the boat, right? And so we need to stop being so nice and we need to start being more kind. And what does kind mean? Being very clear, as Crystal said, like deliberate, specific, necessary, you know, where people genuinely care, where you're looking out for one another, where if someone talks over somebody else, you could be like, excuse me, Christelle was still speaking. She has a lot to say right now. I think we need to be hearing what she has to say, Chad. You know, like the more we can do this and watch out for one another, it actually reduces the stress and increases bonds. And kindness is contagious. Just like toxicity is contagious, kindness is contagious. So my challenge to you in my play experiment number 5, and I'll be going over these experiments again, if you're like, which one's number 4? Is cancel the nice meetings. And I emphasize this, not for you because you're running these as trainers, but I challenge you to challenge your leaders to cancel more of their meetings and spend that time instead working one-on-one with staff or just hanging out with staff or just giving them the autonomy to do their job their way. But really push them when you're sitting with them and being like, is this meeting really important? What are you actually talking about in this meeting, right? And if you need more evidence of this, just read Priya Parker's Art of the Gathering. It's amazing. Great book about like whether a meeting needs to happen or not. But if nothing important can emerge from this meeting, they need to stop wasting time with these meetings and give them the autonomy to do their job in a playful way. They can't play if they don't have time. All right. So we've covered that part. So then what is the culture? Hold on here. So then after that, then we have to explore, okay, regarding the culture of equity, what are you doing for your team leaders to help them identify problems and then take responsibility for addressing those problems? How are you making sure that your team leaders are doing actions to make their staff feel heard? So a process that I recommend y'all do, and you can access this, I'll send these slides out as well, but it's shared through Groundswell, and then also the Step Up program shows this. But this is a great way of deciding where does your team stand when it comes to equity, right? Because you first have people that are actively participating in making people not feel seen and heard. They feel like it's unfair, right? And where on the spectrum are we? And this is what you should be asking for your team, right? So there's active participation in contributing to the inequity. Then what I believe Jaisha said earlier and other people said, denying or ignoring that it's actually happening. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Like all the women get heard on these calls. What are you talking about? It's amazing. We're very inclusive here, right? So just straight gaslighting, right? Then there's the idea of like, oh yeah, I see that's a problem. And then they fall into the black hole of despair, right? The recognition and no action, right? But then there's the recognition and action, but it's very performative, right? Idea of like, yeah. Well, I talked to him and I said that he needs to stop cutting people off. Oh, he hasn't done it yet? Well, I'll talk to him again. So it's like this one-time shot, right? And there's the actual idea of educating ourselves, which we're actually doing here today. And then there's the idea of actually educating others, then actually taking opportunities to support and encourage equity by watching out for one another, and then initiating and preventing, like making sure people don't get cut off in meetings, making sure people feel heard, right? So right now we are here, but that's the question that you should be asking your team leaders. Where are you on this inequity to equity spectrum, especially when it comes to a specific issue that they're talking about? Where are we currently at and how do we move the needle? Just one step up. It's another great question to ask. And I'll go briefly between in this. So there was a, oh gosh, I can't believe I'm sharing this, but this is actually vital. So there was this Harkness.ai paper that came out from a CEO that realized his meetings sucked, but he didn't know why they sucked. So he hired an AI team to analyze his meetings. Why didn't he just ask his staff? I don't know. But he had them instead have AI to analyze the meeting. And they first had staff ask, like, you know, how did you feel right now about your meetings? And a lot of people are like, I don't feel like sharing. It's a nice meeting. It's not productive. One person always dominates the meeting. So the AI ran the numbers and found that the boss was talking 80% of the time. And not only was he talking 80% of the time, but he was specifically only talking to the men in the room. And then women were twice as likely to be interrupted as men inside that meeting. They found that the one woman of color in the room was never acknowledged by the CEO during the meeting. This is all happening in real time, right? So they called him out on his BS, and he, over the next 5 weeks, had to adjust it. So he reduced how much he spoke by 60%. And here were the results. What happened? 120% increase in ideas shared, 20 to 44, 100% decrease in interruptions because he wasn't interrupting people, 50% increase by everyone in the meeting. But then the best results were, because he was reducing the amount he spoke, 600% increase in women's voices being included, and 1,600% increase by the one woman of color, the one Black woman in the room, because this guy was finally able to check himself because he got the data to do it, right? Do you need the data in order to do it? No. But if you're going to do it, this is what we're talking about, of like, bring the data to actually address this. How do we actually run better meetings where people feel heard? And then this is the last experiment before I think we'll have one last quick breakout, is I recommend you do this. And this comes from my Dismantling Toxic Masculinity workshop, where I ask people, what traits does your team currently have? And I list these up here. Which ones do you care about most? Profitability or sustainability? Logic and reasoning or intuition? Like, do we care more about competition or collaboration, right? And then I ask them, what traits does your team currently have? And then I ask them, what traits are your team currently missing? How much are we fostering emotional intelligence? How much are we fostering intuition? How much are we coaching our staff rather than controlling our staff? And then after we do this exercise, then I do the reveal. And then I'm like, okay, here are healthy masculine traits and here are divine feminine traits. We have skewed clearly to much more toxic masculine traits. How are we embracing more divine feminine leadership traits in your team? How are you cultivating those? And that is a great question to constantly be asking your team leaders. What are you doing to foster more of what you are currently missing? And again, neither are more important than the other, but you want to make sure that they're balanced right now. And right now it's very skewed to the point that it's very toxic masculine leadership. That's what Elon Musk is currently exhibiting. So, okay, I will come back to that at the end, but I want to get to this last question of, when they're at a meeting, you should be asking your team leaders, who is silent during the meeting, and do you know why they are silent, right? So here are all the play experiments, because I want to make sure we're covering them all. Here, let me move this over here so that we can see them all. So these are all of the play experiments that you can try, and feel free to take a screenshot of this, and I will also email this out to you, right? What are you doing around people feeling seen, heard, appreciated, and valued? How can you remove perfection? What is your staff's zone of genius? How are you getting them to explore their why, right? How are you canceling those nice meetings and not wasting their time? How are you establishing where your team stands on equity? And then what traits do teams currently are missing when it comes to healthy masculinity and divine feminine leadership traits? And then finally, who is silent at your meetings and why? So that is a lot to go through. So what I want in this last brief breakout is for you, let's see what's going on here, is what action are you willing to take to ensure your staff feel appreciated, seen, and valued? I want you to be thinking about this as we break out, and then answer this question with the group that you're going to be with.
So fast, they don't do it. And then I just have as my bonus one, I just really want to start working on our meeting improvement. Meetings have become, I'm sure it's the same for you all, not so since the pandemic started, right? I mean, like, I am in meetings all the time. I'm like, when do you want me to do the work that we talk about in said meetings? And so that kind of canceling nice meetings, kind meetings, exploring that concept, because also just for the team I'm on, because sometimes we have a lot of meetings where we just talk a lot and nothing happens. So like, let's make some stuff happen.
It's another meeting that could have been an email.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kevin, Nylene, there you go.
Yeah, I'll go. So I like kind of what you were saying, Christelle, the finding out what is missing on a team, because I don't know if it's sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you have the opportunity to identify what makes a good team, or what are the components. You think, oh, everything's okay, but why is it not moving forward as much? And then I think looking at those graphics and going, oh yeah, it's kind of important to have this balance, because if you're two on one side, maybe the reason why is because you don't have something that's brings that balance, and which can kind of build the team. Just kind of like the example of the meetings that when you gave it opportunity to flower, to grow, you got a lot more input, a lot of things, because that one guy was dominating everything and was preventing people from being able to express themselves. So I think that's a good, at least a place to start, kind of identifying those things and see if that's a place to go and do the analysis and then grow from there. I already have a good team that I'm on, so it's not like these things are working. Like, yeah, I think we're good in these areas, but there's obviously always room for improvement. So.
All right, we're coming back. We're wrapping up here. All right. Coming back, and we're gonna wrap up right here. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to hear from some of you, as I heard some genius being shared, and I want to make sure I get this in the recording for anyone that misses it. Lorna, you mentioned something about being in the mess. Can you expand on that, or someone else that from the group, because that was genius in my opinion.
That was Marcy.
Was it Marcy? Was it
That
Marcy?
was Marcy, yeah.
Oh no, yeah, Lauren was driving. Okay. So who was in that group? Nuna, can you express what Marcy was sharing?
Yeah, Marcy was talking about accepting feedback and not immediately jumping to like justify your actions or defend your actions when hearing feedback, even if it's like unfavorable or it might hit you a certain way, saying, thank you, we've noted that, and we'll, take it back to the rest of the group, or just some sort of appreciation, acceptance, and then moving on. And that's kind of the messy area that she was referring to, where you might immediately feel like defensive, but refraining from doing that.
And then Jaisha, you had mentioned something about the perfection part that you had spoken to leaders about.
Yeah, it's just that it's hard, especially working in the government sector. To them, failure is not an option.
Yep.
We have all these rules and regulations, but it's like, where do you give people the opportunity to kind of work in the gray? No, we're not asking people to just break laws and rules, but a lot of times they're talking about building this innovation culture, but everything that you're saying is antithetical to that.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you giving them permission to fail forward and learn from those? I said, because, think about it. I said, we've been failing since birth. I said, no one came out the womb learning how to crawl and walk. We had to try a few times. I don't know where the switch where it was okay when we were young to fail, but now we can't fail now and learn from that. So it's just, getting people to look at the power of failing forward and
Yes.
and the creativity that comes from that. Usually when people make a mistake, there is a teachable moment there. And now they have data to inform them how to not engage in that same similar pattern of behaviors and actions as well. So yeah.
Jaisha, we got to go on the road together. My goodness, this is good. Well, I think the other part that, and talking about government, because I was just speaking to HR and government in DC, aren't you failing already? Like, you've been doing the same thing for like 30 years. Like,
already,
you don't want failure. Like, dude, nothing's working right now. So, or a lot of things are not nothing, but a lot of things are not working. Okay. There was something, Jen, you mentioned that I wanted to make sure was shared, that you were sharing with your group.
Which amazing point did I make? I forgot. There's just so many.
Well, which is the action that you said you were going to take?
Oh no, I already forgot. So I didn't write it
Oh,
down.
you were mentioning something about the nice meetings and the amount of meetings. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of you, I would assume, have had this happen, but especially since the pandemic started. I mean, I'm just in meetings all the time because everyone's virtual. So they forget lunch breaks and bathroom breaks and all those things. So I really want to, and just on my team, I want to explore those concepts of the nice versus kind meeting with my team, because I feel like sometimes we try to have those nice meetings and it's like, well, what's going to happen? Like, how are we going to accomplish things? And so I think looking at that and having that framework will be different, which sometimes is good, right? I think we've talked about some of these things before, but new words, and maybe working with them to come up with, I love that, humanity breaks. It's so true. Sometimes I just go lay on my bed for like a minute. Like I have a meeting and I'm just like, oh my God, okay, I'm better.
Not to mention, you'll become a hero if you're like, we're going to cancel the meeting this week. Like, oh my gosh, I have free time. Like, oh goodness. So, and then last, does anyone else want to share before we wrap up? Because Nunu has a couple last items she wants to make sure. Crystal, I feel like I should give you the floor one more time, just in case. Just so you can drop some knowledge.
I was just dropping it in the chat. So it's this
share
thought,
it,
right?
Let's get it documented.
That innovation, right? The idea of we don't get it right 100% of the time. We are human and we have to make mistakes. And I always joke, like, I've never made a mistake in my life, but I've had like a million learning experiences. Because to me, the idea of a mistake is that didn't work. I better try it again because something went wrong. Whereas learning experiences are, that didn't work. What can I learn from it and then take from it? Well, then it's not a failure. It's not a mistake. It's just, hey, I learned something from that and I'll do it differently. And so it's going back to Kouzes and Posner, right? 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Yeah. One of their behaviors is when things don't go as expected, we ask, okay, what do we learn from this? And then put things into place or into practice that keep us from making that mistake in the future. Life is a learning experience. And if you're not learning, you're dying, right? So
yes. And if you're not playing, you're dying. So let's
go. Amen.
Let's go. So as I wrap this up, I always share this, especially when I'm talking about, toxicity, but this idea of like, we really are at a crossroads right now of where we want the future of work to go. And not to put so much on you, but it is on you. You are partly determining where the future of work goes, right? Are we going to go to the pre-pandemic past built off of ego, shame, and toxicity? Or are we finally ready to embrace humanity, right? Humanity breaks, but are we finally willing to embrace humanity, compassion, empathy, and allow a shared humanity in the workplace? And that starts with y'all. So this is what every decision that is made, think about which choice are you actually making in this? How are you infusing humanity back in the workplace so we can create psychological safety and people can enjoy work once again? Thanks, Nunu, for having me. And that is it.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you all for being here, being part